A man learns what he's made of on the day his own crew rides off and leaves him to die. Mine left me face down in the greasewood with a swelled leg, and a horse run off to God knew where, and the last thing I heard before the fever took my eyes was Cobb Tidwell saying it'd be a kindness not to waste a bullet. That was the measure of the men I'd hired. It took an Apache woman I'd never met to teach me the measure of everything else. I was 41 years old that summer, and I'd have told you my heart was buried 6 years deep, out behind the hollow cross under the one cottonwood that ever took root on that hard ground. Mattie went in the fever season of 70, and I put her there myself because the preacher in San Matera wouldn't ride out so far for a woman he'd never met. I dug the hole and I filled it, and I didn't cry because crying is a thing you do when you still expect the world to answer you, and I'd quit expecting that. I ran cattle. I paid wages. I went to town twice a year. That was a life, the way a fence post is a tree. So you understand the kind of man who got himself bit. It was a fork-tongue rattler the size of a wagon brake, sunning in the rocks above Cibola Spring where I'd no business being. I was chasing a strayed heifer up into country I didn't know, and I put my hand down to climb where I should have looked first, and the thing took me high on the calf through my boot, leather like the leather wasn't there. I shot it. Then I sat down in the shade of a boulder and watched my leg turn the color of a thundercloud, and I called for Tidwell and the 2 hands I'd brought, and they came to the lip of the rocks and looked down at me. "That's a bad one, boss," Tidwell said. He had a way of talking around a thing. "Get me down to water," I told him. "Cut it and bleed it." He didn't move. None of them did. I'd paid Cobb Tidwell $40 a month for 2 years, and I'd thought him a hard man but a square one, and I learned in about the time it takes to spit that he was only the first. A man who'll leave you doesn't tell you he's leaving. He just gets quieter and then he's gone, and the silence where his boots were is the loudest thing you ever heard. "Tidwell," I said. "You'll want to make your peace," he said, and that was the last of him. I will not lie and say I was brave about it. I cursed them down the canyon, and I cursed the snake, and then, when the cursing ran out, I cursed God, which is a thing a man does when he's run out of other people to blame and isn't ready yet to blame himself. The leg swelled till the boot had to come off in pieces. The light went strange. I remember the rocks turning soft and the sky coming down close, and I remember thinking, with a kind of relief I'm ashamed of now, that I'd be under the cottonwood by morning and it would be done. I didn't hear her come. That's the first thing I'd say about Sella. If you wanted to know her, you never heard her come. I opened my eyes because a shadow had crossed the sun, and there was a woman crouched over my ruined leg with a knife in her hand, and every fevered fool notion the territory had ever poured into me stood straight up and screamed. She was younger than me by a good span, dressed in deerskin gone soft and brown as her own arms, her hair black and bound back off a face that gave me nothing at all. She had my leg in one hand like a thing she was deciding about. The knife was small and very clean. Behind her, higher in the rocks, stood an old man and a boy and 3 horses, watching, and not one of them looked like they'd lose sleep over how this went. "I've got money," I said, which is the stupidest thing I have ever said in my life, and I've said plenty. "At the ranch, I've got." She put 2 fingers against my mouth, not gentle exactly, more the way you'd quiet a horse that was working itself toward hurting somebody. Then she went to work on my leg. She cut where the swelling was worst and she bled it, and she packed it with something green she'd chewed to paste, and through all of it her face never changed and her hands never hurried, and somewhere in there I understood 2 things at once that have stayed with me the rest of my days. The first was that I was not going to die. The second was that I had been about to, and that the only reason I wasn't was a woman my own people had taught me to call enemy before I'd ever laid eyes on one. The old man came down then. He spoke to her in their tongue, low, and she answered without looking up, and whatever passed between them I couldn't read. But he came and looked at me a long moment, and what was in his face wasn't hate and it wasn't pity. It was a kind of weighing. I've thought since that he was deciding whether the cost of me was worth the trouble of me, and that he decided yes for her sake and not for mine, and that he was right to wonder. They put me on a travois behind one of the horses. The boy led it. I passed out before we'd cleared the rocks. When the world came back, it came back in pieces, wood smoke, the smell of roasting agave, a wickiups brush wall close over my head, a gourd of something bitter held to my lips by hands I already knew. Days went by like that, I don't know how many. The fever burned the bad blood out of me, and the leg went down and the black went out of it, and every time I surfaced she was there, or the old man was, or the boy. They fed me. They cleaned the wound. Nobody talked to me, because I had no words they wanted and they had none they cared to waste, and a strange thing happens to a man in that silence. He starts to watch. I watched her grind seed on a flat stone with a fist of granite, the muscle moving in her forearm, her whole body bent to a thing she'd done 10,000 times and would do 10,000 more. I watched her doctor a child with a burned hand, and an old woman with a cough, and a horse with a split hoof, and I understood that this was a person of weight among her people. That the camp came to her, the way San Madera came to the doctor it half trusted and wholly needed. I watched her laugh once at something the boy said, and the laugh changed her face so completely that I lay there afterward feeling like a man who'd seen a coyote stand up and recite scripture. I'd thought I knew what she was. I knew nothing. It was the old man who first gave me words. His name, I'd learn, was Daho, and he was her mother's father, and he'd known white men before, known them well enough to speak a hard, careful English he'd kept like a tool he didn't trust but might need. He came one evening and sat by me and said, "You will walk soon." "I owe you my life," I said, "all of you." "You owe her," he said, "not me. I would have left you." He said it plain, no cruelty in it, and I respected him for it more than for any kindness. She said a man left to die is a man no one will answer for. She does not like a debt left in the world, so, he shrugged. You are her debt now, not mine. Her name, I said. I'd like to know it. He looked at me a while. Then he told me, and I'm not going to set it down the way he gave it, because the way he gave it was a gift and it wasn't mine to hand around. The settlers who came after called her Sella, which was near enough to a sound in her name, and that's the name I'll use, but understand it was a smoothing down of something truer, the way the territory smoothed down everything it touched. Sella, I said, trying it. Daho almost smiled. She is wasted on you, he said, and got up and left me to think about that, which I did. He wasn't wrong. I walked out of that camp 12 days after I'd been carried into it, on a leg that would ache in the cold for the rest of my life, leading a borrowed horse I swore to return. I went home to find the hollow cross had not waited for me. Tidwell had cleared the strongbox and a good third of the herd and lit out south, and the 2 hands with him, and the ranch I came back to was a house with the door swinging and 40 head fewer than it owed. I should have felt robbed. Mostly, I felt the strangeness of being alive in a place that had given me up. I returned the horse. I told myself I'd leave it at the canyon mouth and let them find it, but when it came to it, I rode up to the camp openly, alone, my hands where they could be seen, and Daho came out and the boy came out, and after a while she came out too and stood with her arms folded and her face giving me nothing, the way it had over the knife. I'd brought what I had. It wasn't much after Tidwell. A side of cured beef, a sack of coffee, a bolt of trade cloth I'd been keeping for no reason since Maddie died. I laid it down and I said to Daho, because he had the words, but looking at her because she had the right, I don't know your custom for a thing like this. Where I'm from, a man pays his debts. I know this doesn't pay it. I know there's no paying it, but I'd be poor in my own eyes if I didn't try. Daho turned it into her tongue. She listened. Then she spoke, a good long while, and Daho listened, and at the end of it he turned to me and said, "She says the beef is welcome and the cloth is welcome and the coffee she will trade to her cousin who is a fool for it." A pause. "She says you do not pay a life. You carry it. She says now you have 2, your own and the one she spent saving it. She says try not to lose them both to a snake." I laughed before I could stop myself. And I'll swear to this, something moved at the corner of her mouth, just for a breath, before the stillness came back down. I'd like to tell you I went home that day a changed man and rode straight into love like a fool into a creek. It wasn't like that. What happened was slower and more like the way ground thaws, not all at once, not anywhere you can point to. Just one morning you notice the frost is gone and you can't say when. I came back. That's the whole of it. I had reason. There was a brood mare of theirs I doctored in return, having learned a thing or two watching Sella. And there was good water on my low ground they were welcome to in the dry months. And there was the simple fact that I'd run out of people who'd leave me and found a handful who, for their own reasons, had not. I came back, and I learned their words a few at a time, clumsy as a calf on ice, and Sella took to correcting my mistakes with a flat patience that I came to live for, because it meant she was paying me mind. The first time she spoke to me in my own tongue I near fell off the wagon seat. I'd been blundering through some greeting and she said, in English plainer than Dahoe's, "You say it like you are angry at the word." I stared. She'd had it all along, picked off the soldiers and the traders the way she picked everything off the country, quietly and completely, and she'd let me flounder for the better part of a season for her own private amusement. "You let me make a fool of myself," I said, "for weeks." And she looked at me with those level eyes and said, "It was not weeks, and you did not need help." That was the day I quit pretending to myself about why I kept riding up that canyon. It would have stayed a slow and private thing, I think, mine to keep behind my ribs the way I kept Matty, if Harlan Squire hadn't decided he wanted Cibola Spring. Squire ran the biggest outfit on the Rita, the Crooked Y, and he ran it the way some men run everything, by deciding what he wanted and then deciding the wanting made it his. The spring sat on open range that the band had watered at since before there was a territory to have a land office in, and Squire's herd had grown till his low water wouldn't hold it. And so one spring, he simply moved his cattle up onto Cibola and put 3 men with rifles at the canyon mouth, and let it be known that the Crooked Y was watering there now, and that any Apache found near it would be treated as a horse thief is treated, which in San Matera's law was no law at all. I heard it in town. I'd ridden in for nails and word was thick in the mercantile, the men of San Matera talking it over the way men do a thing that costs them nothing and pleases them anyway. Squire was clearing the savages off the water, they said. About time. A man couldn't run an outfit with hostiles at his back. I stood there with my sack of nails, and I felt the old buried thing under my ribs come up sideways, and I heard myself say into the warm store air, "They've watered there 40 years. It's open range. It's no more his than mine." It got quiet. A man named Prout, who clerked for the land office and fancied himself the law's friend, looked at me careful. "Didn't know you took up for the Apache, Caro." "I took up for the open range," I said. "Today it's their spring. Tomorrow it's my low ground. A man who'll move a herd onto water that ain't his because he's got more rifles will do it twice." That was true, and they knew it was true, and it didn't matter, because a true thing said for the wrong people might as well be a lie. I left the nails on the counter. I rode for the canyon, and I won't pretend I had a plan because I didn't. I had a snakebit leg and 1 rifle and a head full of the look that would be on Sella's face, and that was the whole of my army. The camp had pulled back into the high rocks, the way her people had learned to pull back from everything, going small and quiet and ready to be gone. Dahoe met me with a face like the canyon wall. The young men were for fighting. I could see it, the way they stood, the way the boy who'd led my travois now carried a rifle too big for him and wore it like a grudge. And Sella stood apart from all of it, and when she looked at me there was something new in her face, the first time I'd ever seen it there, and it took me a moment to know it for what it was. It was fear, not for herself, for all of them. "If we fight," Dahoe said, "they will bring soldiers, and the soldiers will not ask who started it. They never ask. If we go to the reservation land, which has no water either, and we die there slower." He spread his hands. "There is no road out of this that I can see, Caro. I tell you because you brought beef once, and a man who brings beef should know the truth of the camp he brings it to." "There's a road," I said. I didn't know there was until I heard myself say it. "It's a slow one and it runs through San Matera, and it'll cost me what little name I've got left in that town. But it's a road, and it doesn't end with soldiers." Sella came near then. She stood close enough that I could have touched her, which I had never once done in all the months, save the day she'd quieted my mouth over the knife. "Why?" she said, just that. "Not why are you helping? Why are you here at all? Why does a man ride up a canyon into other people's trouble when his own people stand in a store and call it justice?" I want to tell you I had a fine answer. What I had was the truth, which is usually plainer and worse. "Because you carried my life when it would have cost you nothing to set it down," I said. "And a man who takes a thing like that and then rides off when the bill comes due is Cobb Tidwell, and I'd sooner be snakebit again than be him." She looked at me a long moment. Then she said something to Daho in their tongue, low, and he looked between us with an expression I couldn't name, and he nodded once, slow. "She says," Daho told me, "that she will trust your road, once." He paused, and the old man's mouth did its almost smile. "She says she has trusted you with less reason before." The road through San Matera was every bit as slow and ugly as I'd promised. I won't drag you down all of it. The short of it is that Squire was wrong in law, and I made the law care. Cibola Spring sat on land that had never been claimed, never filed, never bought open public range, which meant Squire had no more right to fence its water than I did, and far less than the people who'd watered there before the surveyors came. But open range is held by the man with the rifles unless somebody makes a paper say otherwise. And so I went to make a paper. I filed at the land office under the desert claim, not for me but with a fool's honesty about what it was for, and Prout looked at me like I'd lost my mind, and maybe I had. I wrote to the territorial agent. I wrote to a circuit judge I'd once sold a string of horses and who owed me a fair turn. I rode 200 miles of that summer with my bad leg aching every mile, and I stood up in a hot room in the territorial seat, and I swore, before men who didn't want to hear it, that the Crooked Y had moved armed men onto public water and turned it private by force, and that I'd seen it, and that I'd say so anywhere a man could be made to answer for it. It is a strange thing to stand up alone for people who aren't allowed in the room you're standing up in. But here is what I learned that summer, and it's the truest thing I know. A man's word, if he has spent his whole life being careful with it, is worth more than 100 rifles, because a rifle only frightens the man in front of it, and a word, said in the right room, frightens the men who give the orders. Squire had bullet a spring. He had not reckoned on a witness who couldn't be paid off, scared off, or shot without questions. And I had spent 6 years being a man nobody had cause to call a liar, and it turned out that was worth something after all. The judge ruled the water open. Public range, public water, no man's to fence, and the Crooked Y to pull its rifles and its herd off Cibola or answer for it. Squire raged. He sent 2 men to the Hollow Cross one night to burn my barn, and they got it half going before I drove them off. And I'll tell you the truth, I shot one through the shoulder and was glad. But that was the end of it. A bully will spend a fortune on a thing nobody's watching, and not a penny on a thing the whole territory now was. He pulled back. The spring stayed open. The band watered there that fall as they had for 40 years, and the boy who'd carried my travois rode down to the burnt corner of my barn and helped me rebuild it without a word said, which is how his people said the things mine used words to ruin. I lost most of my name in San Matera over it. The mercantile got cool. The preacher who'd never ridden out for Matty found he had even less use for me now. I found I didn't grieve it. A man can't lose what he'd quit valuing, and I'd quit valuing the good opinion of men who'd stand in a store and cheer a stolen spring. Sella came down to the Hollow Cross the day after the water was ruled open. She came alone, on the brood mare I'd doctored, and she didn't say why and I didn't ask. She walked the burnt corner of the barn and she walked the cottonwood out back, and she stood a while at the grave under it, which I had never spoken of, and which she had never asked about and somehow knew anyway. "Your wife," she said. "Mattie, 6 years." She was quiet, then she said, "You buried your heart with her." It wasn't a question, and I didn't treat it as one. "I thought so," I said. "I'd have told anybody so. I dug the hole myself." I looked at her standing there in the long evening light with the whole ruined and rebuilt place around us, and the thing I'd kept behind my ribs since the day she'd corrected my clumsy English came up my throat and would not be put down again. I'm not a man of speeches. I've heard it said that the hardest words a man owns are the small true ones, and I believe it, because I stood there a grown man of 41 and shook like the boy with the too big rifle. "Sella," I said, "I have been telling myself for half a year that what I feel is a debt, that I ride up that canyon to pay you back. I am done telling myself that. It's a lie and I'm too old for lies." I made myself look at her. "It isn't the debt. It hasn't been the debt since you let me make a fool of myself for weeks and then told me I didn't need the help. I came back for you. I'll keep coming back for you. And if you tell me to stop, I will, and I'll mean it because you've earned the right to tell me anything. But I won't keep pretending it's a thing it isn't. Listen, my heart. I'm telling you plain. It isn't buried. It hasn't been for a while. It just took a snakebit fool a long time to dig it back up and find out it still worked." She was quiet for so long I thought I'd ruined it. The light went gold and then went red. Somewhere the rebuilt barn ticked as it cooled. Then she said, in that level voice that had corrected my words and quieted my mouth and carried my whole life out of the rocks on a travois, "I know. And when I just stared, I have known longer than you. I am a healer. I see what is sick in a man and what is mending." The corner of her mouth moved, and this time it didn't stop. This time it opened all the way into the laugh I'd seen her give the boy, the one that rearranged her whole face. And she gave it to me. "You are mending," she said. "Slowly, you do everything slowly." I won't set down the rest of that evening, because the rest of it was hours and some things a man keeps. I'll say only that she stayed, and that she went home in the morning to speak to Daiho and her people, on her own feet and by her own choice, because she would no more have a man speak for her than she'd have one buy or take her, and I would no more have asked it. What we built the way the territory built everything that lasted, slow, and against the grain of it, and with a great deal more grit than grace. Her people did not all forgive it. Some never came near the hollow cross again, and I understood and never held it. The territory did not forgive it at all. We were a thing San Matera had a low word for, and we heard the word and we outlived it. Daiho came to live his last years under our roof, and he and I sat many evenings on the porch while he made his hard, careful English do the work of telling me his life. And the day he died, Sella doctored him to the end with the same flat patience she doctored me. And we put him under the cottonwood beside Mattie, the two of them. The woman who'd had the first half of my heart and the old man who'd warned me I was wasted on his granddaughter and been right. We had years. I won't tell you how many because the counting of them isn't the point. The point is that there were enough, and that every one of them was a thing I'd been left for dead without. The boy grew into a man and took my cattle and her horses and ran the hollow cross better than I ever did. There were others in time who called Sella by the name her people gave her and called me an old fool to my face, which is the truest sign of love I know. I've outlived most of what I started with: the herd, the name, the men who left me, the men who cheered a stolen spring. Cibola still runs open. I made sure of the paper. Anybody can water there, which was always the only thing I was fighting for, though San Matera never could see it. I sit out under the cottonwood most evenings now, with the two graves and the one that'll be mine, and I think about a 41-year-old man face down in the greasewood, sure his heart was buried and glad to be following it under. I think how close I came to being right. And then I think of a shadow crossing the sun, and a small clean knife, and a woman who didn't like a debt left in the world, deciding I was worth the trouble of carrying. She was wasted on me. Daiho said so the second day I knew her, and he was right, and I spent the rest of my life trying to be less of a waste than he'd reckoned. That's the whole of it. A man left for dead by his own kind and carried back to the living by a stranger he'd been raised to fear, who turned out to be the truest soul ever to lay hands on him. Listen, my heart. I'm telling you plain, the way I finally learned to. There was no debt. There was never any debt. There was only her, walking out of the high rocks, and the long good work of deserving it.